Look, if we're being completely honest here, ranking Spider Man movies is basically a blood sport on the internet. I mean, you say one wrong thing about Tobey Maguire's organic webbing or Tom Holland's Iron Man suits, and suddenly half of Twitter is calling for your head. But today, we are doing it right. We are laying it all out on the table, but I'm not just pulling these rankings out of thin air. No, we are using a very specific two pass system. The first pass is the raw score pass where we look at the pure craft of the movie against modern 2026 standards. The second pass is the era adjusted temporal equalization pass, where we put context back into the mix. Let's dive into Pass 1, the raw scores. Number 10, Spider Man 3, score 4.0. Spider Man 3, this one hurts, it really does. Because somewhere buried under the memes of emo Peter Parker dancing down the street, there is a genuinely great movie trying to get out. The Sandman birth sequence is still one of the most beautiful, tragic pieces of visual storytelling in superhero history. The way the sand struggles to pull itself together, reaching for the locket of his daughter, it's poetry. But a movie can't survive on one good scene. The problem with Spider Man 3 is the infamous studio mandate. Sam Raimi didn't want Venom in this movie. He wanted to focus on Sandman and the new Goblin. But Sony forced Venom in, and the result is a narrative structure that completely loses track of its own emotional core. It tries to be a story about forgiveness, but it buries that theme under a mountain of symbiote goo and bad haircuts. None of them get a complete arc. It's impossible. You cannot fit three villain origin stories, three villain redemption arcs, and one hero's internal crisis of character into a runtime of 2 hours and 19 minutes. The math doesn't work. It never worked. I love Raimi, but this one just collapses under its own weight. It gets a 4.0. It hurts, but it belongs at the bottom. Number 9, The Amazing Spider Man 2, score 5.0. All right, moving on to number 9, The Amazing Spider Man 2. I mean, okay, wait, let me back up. If we were ranking these movies purely based on the Spider Man suit, this movie would be top 3. The big white eyes, the fabric ripples in the wind, it is visually spectacular. And the web swinging, kinetically, physically, mechanically, it is the best it has ever been in a live action Spider Man movie, full stop. The camera tracks through Manhattan right at street level. You actually feel the air resistance. The momentum is real, the gravity feels heavy. There is no debate here. The Amazing Spider Man 2 perfected the physics of swinging, and Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone, their chemistry is genuinely off the charts. You could watch an entire indie rom-com of just Peter and Gwen doing laundry, and it would be riveting. But a movie actually needs, a coherent script, and The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is basically a 2.5 hour trailer for a Sinister Six movie that never actually happened. Sony was so obsessed with catching up to Marvel's Avengers that they forgot to tell a standalone story. Every single scene that exists purely to set up a spin off franchise is a scene that doesn't exist to service this story, and the result is a narrative structure that collapses under its own weight. Also, I'm just going to say it, Paul Giamatti in a giant CGI rhinoceros mech suit is a war crime against a great comics villain. And the villains? Where do we even begin? Jamie Foxx's Electro is given this completely bizarre, cartoonish motivation. He goes from a lonely guy who just wants a friend to a mass murdering energy god because Spider Man forgot his name? And the dubstep theme song by Hans Zimmer and Pharrell. Look, I respect the swing, but it is deeply, painfully 2014. Then you have Dane DeHaan's Green Goblin, which is just inexplicably rushed. He gets a rare disease, turns into a goblin who looks like he needs a lozenge, and then we get the clock tower scene. The death of Gwen Stacy is beautifully shot. The web turning into a hand reaching out for her is brilliant, but it's unearned because the rest of the movie is such a chaotic corporate spreadsheet. It scores a solid 5.0, entirely carried by Andrew and Emma's sheer charisma. Number 8, The Amazing Spider-Man score 6.0. Now this one is a bit of a heartbreaker for me. The Amazing Spider-Man, the 2012 reboot. The main issue with this movie is that it simply didn't need to exist yet. We were only 5 years removed from Tobey Maguire, and Sony just hit the panic button so they wouldn't lose the rights. So, what do? They give it the late 2000s Twilight treatment. Everything is darker, grittier. Peter is riding a skateboard and listening to Coldplay. It's a very specific vibe. But honestly, Andrew Garfield brings a really fascinating, nervous, almost angry energy to Peter Parker. He's a bit of a jerk early on, which is actually very comic accurate to the original Stan Lee and Steve Ditko run. The problem is the lizard. The CGI it's actually not the CGI, it's the physics and the design. He looks like a giant Goomba from the Super Mario Brothers movie, and his master plan is to turn everyone in New York into lizards. It feels like a Saturday morning cartoon villain dropped into a Christopher Nolan movie, and the deeply forced, studio mandated, untold story subplot about Peter's parents being super spies. It's a pacing black hole that goes absolutely nowhere, largely because the promised sequels were canceled before it could pay off. But I'll tell you what works. Dennis Leary as Captain Stacy is fantastic, and the crane scene where all the New York construction workers line up the cranes so a wounded Spider-Man can swing to Oscorp is cheesy as hell, but it absolutely works. It has heart. It's a good, solid movie trapped in a cynical corporate mandate. It lands at a 6.0. Number 7, Spider-Man 2, raw score 6.33. Yes, you heard me right. In terms of pure modern narrative pacing against 2026 standards, Spider-Man 2 starts here. What makes Spider-Man 2 brilliant is that it fundamentally understands the core tragedy of the character. Peter Parker's life has to suck so that Spider-Man can succeed. Every time Spider-Man wins, Peter loses. He's failing his classes, he's losing Mary Jane, he can't pay his rent, and the villain, Alfred Molina as Dr. Octopus. He isn't evil for the sake of being evil, he's a broken man driven by the artificial intelligence of his own mechanical arms. The hospital scene where the arms wake up and slaughter the surgical team is straight out of a Sam Raimi horror film. It's terrifying. But pacing wise, the middle section where Peter loses his powers due to psychosomatic stress drags considerably by modern thriller standards. Do not panic, though. We will absolutely return to this in Pass 2. Number 6, Spider-Man No Way Home, score 6.67. I know. Put down the pitchforks. Look, I can hear you screaming at the screen right now. Number 6? Are you insane? Listen to me. The theater experience for No Way Home was one of the greatest moments of my life. When Andrew Garfield stepped through that portal and then Tobey Maguire walked out in youth pastor clothes, my theater exploded. It was magic. It was a cultural event. And this is a massive but, if you strip away the nostalgia, if you take off the rose tinted glasses and just look at the script, the scaffolding holding this movie together is made of wet paper. I mean, think about it. The entire plot happens because Doctor Strange, the Sorcerer Supreme, the guy who calculated 14 million alternate futures, decides to cast a highly dangerous, reality breaking spell while a teenager is actively talking to him. It makes absolutely no sense. The cinematography is also shockingly flat. A lot of the movie looks like it was shot in a gray parking lot. Plus, the visual effects during the climax on the Statue of Liberty are, look, I'll be generous, they are embarrassingly muddy for a movie that grossed $1.9 billion. But despite all of its structural flaws, the movie is undeniably anchored by Tom Holland's best acting in the franchise, especially in the wake of Aunt May's death. And we have to talk about Willem Dafoe. Coming back after 20 years and somehow being even more terrifying, that scene in the apartment where he's just taking punches to the face from Tom Holland and grinning? Chilling. It is an incredible theme park ride, but as a standalone film, it rests too heavily on the shoulders of movies that came before it. It gets a 6.67. Number 5, Spider-Man Homecoming, score 6.83. So, stepping fully into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, we have Spider-Man Homecoming. This was such a breath of fresh air in 2017. Sony and Marvel wisely decided not to show us Uncle Ben dying for a third time. Instead, they gave us a John Hughes style high school teen comedy that just happens to have a superhero in it. Tom Holland is perfectly cast. He actually looks and sounds like a 15-year-old kid. He's awkward, he's eager to please, and he's constantly screwing up. But look, there is a vocal subset of the internet that calls this version of the character Iron Man Jr. And look, I don't totally agree, but I see their point. Having Tony Stark build Peter's suit, complete with a talking AI and an instant kill mode, does strip away a bit of the working class DIY spirit of Peter Parker. Spider Man isn't supposed to have a billionaire safety net. Think about it. The suit is Stark's, the missions are Stark's. The primary antagonist is fighting Stark's legacy. The plane he has to save belongs to Stark, Spider Man's entire foundational characteristic, the thing that literally separates him from the billionaire playboys of the Marvel Universe, is that he is self made. He built his own web shooters out of spare parts in a messy bedroom in Queens. However, Homecoming makes up for it with its villain. Michael Keaton as the Vulture is a blue collar guy who just got screwed over by the system. And that twist, you know the one, when Peter opens the door to pick up his date and the Vulture is standing there, the air was sucked out of the theater. The tension in that car ride to the dance is better than any CGI skybeam fight in the entire MCU. And the scene where Peter is trapped under the rubble, forced to rely on his own strength rather than the suit, perfection. It earns its 6.83. Number 4, Spider-Man 2002, raw score 6.88. Okay, we are entering the top 4. This is where things get serious. Sam Raimi's original 2002 Spider-Man. Now, if you go back and watch this movie today, the raw 2026 score might feel a bit low. Some of the dialogue is incredibly cheesy, and the CGI of Spider-Man swinging looks like a PlayStation 2 cutscene. The screenplay, the literal foundational document for the entire 2-hour runtime, is lifted almost wholesale from a scriptment that James Cameron wrote back in 1991. If you don't know, a scriptment is basically this hybrid treatment screenplay thing that filmmakers use to pitch their ideas. Cameron wrote his, Sony licensed it for a ridiculous amount of money, and then they handed it over to a different writer who essentially filed the serial numbers off and called it an original script. But we really need to talk about the cast, because they are the foundation of everything. Tobey Maguire didn't play Peter Parker as a cool guy who just happened to wear glasses. He played him with this brutal, almost uncomfortable earnestness. You watch him staring at Kirsten Dunst's Mary Jane, and by the way, Kirsten Dunst grounds this entire movie in a way that rarely gets enough credit. She brings a tragic girl-next-door reality to MJ that makes the stakes feel incredibly human. And J.K. Simmons? I mean, he was literally born to play J. Jonah Jameson. It's the most perfect casting in comic book history, period. Then there's Willem Dafoe as Norman Osborn. People give the Green Goblin suit a lot of crap. They call it a Power Rangers villain outfit. And yeah, the static mask is a bit of a bummer. That is not a creative choice. That is a massive failure of production design held hostage by a toy licensing deal. They wanted an action figure, so they threw away one of the greatest acting assets they had. But Defoe completely bypasses the plastic mask, using his voice and his body language much beneath. That scene where he's talking to himself in the mirror, deliver us from evil. It is unhinged, theatrical perfection. The raw craft places it around 6.88. Number 3, Spider-Man Far From Home, score 7.0. Look, I actually think this movie is severely underrated. Far From Home had the impossible task of serving as the epilogue to Avengers Endgame. It had to deal with the trauma of a universe-shattering event while still being a fun European vacation movie, and it somehow pulls it off. The core of this movie is about Peter dealing with grief. He doesn't want to be the next Iron Man. He just wants to go on a trip and tell the girl he likes how he feels. That is the most relatable, quintessentially Peter Parker motivation ever. And Jake Gyllenhaal as Quentin Beck, Mysterio, absolute brilliance. Casting him was a stroke of genius because Gyllenhaal plays that warm mentor figure so well that you almost forget he's one of Spider Man's greatest villains. He manipulates Peter perfectly. Let's recap. Peter has just been handed a pair of augmented reality glasses that give him unchecked access to a global orbital strike satellite network, and he immediately hands them over to a guy he met 2 days ago because the guy bought him a beer and listened to him vent. But the real reason this movie ranks so high is the illusion sequence. Oh my god, when Mysterio traps Peter in that hallucinatory funhouse, it is a visual masterpiece. It feels like a comic book splash page come to life. Zombie Iron Man clawing out of the grave, the giant Mysterio globe, the mirrors. It's exactly how a fight with Mysterio should feel. Disorienting, terrifying, and deeply psychological. Add in that massive mid-credits scene where his identity is revealed to the world. It's a phenomenal, tight, highly entertaining package. It scores a very solid 7.0. Number 2, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, score 9.67. I mean, how do you even talk about this movie without just drooling over the visuals? Across the Spider-Verse took the impossible standard set by the first movie and somehow expanded it into this sprawling, psychedelic, multi-dimensional epic. The animation leap here is unfathomable. Every single universe has its own distinct visual language. You go into Gwen Stacy's world, and it's painted in these dripping watercolors that literally shift and bleed based on her emotional state. It's like a mood ring come to life. Then you have Spider-Punk, who is animated like a Sex Pistols zine cutout, operating on a different frame rate than the rest of the cast. But the movie isn't just a tech demo. The emotional core is so strong. The Spot goes from a villain of the week joke to an eldritch, terrifying cosmic threat. And the central conflict, Miles Morales being told by the entire Spider Society that his father has to die to preserve the canon, and Miles simply saying, "Nah, I'ma do my own thing," is the most empowering, perfectly distilled essence of who Spider-Man is. Spider-Man always tries to save everyone. The only, and I mean the absolute only, reason this isn't number one is because it is half of a movie. That cliffhanger is brutal. When Beyond the Spider-Verse comes out, this might take the crown, but as a standalone experience, it has to sit at number 2. It earns a colossal 9.67. Number 1, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, score 10.0. You knew it was coming. It had to be this. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse is not just the greatest Spider-Man movie ever made. It is one of the greatest animated films of all time. Full stop. This movie changed the entire animation industry. Before this, every animated movie was just trying to copy the Pixar smooth 3D house style. Spider-Verse came in and said, "What if we make a comic book actually move?" The production pipeline they had to build to create this movie was literally registered as intellectual property. They patented the software, not the story, not the characters. They patented the actual technical software process for how the frames were rendered, because literally nothing like it had ever existed before. The halftones, the Ben-Day dots, the panel lines, the hand-drawn smear frames. It was a revelation. But beyond the art, it's the perfect origin story. Miles Morales is such a phenomenally written character. He's overwhelmed, he's terrified, and his relationship with his Uncle Aaron grounds the multiversal madness in real, heartbreaking stakes. The dynamic between Miles and the older, depressed Peter B. Parker is a masterclass in character writing. They heal each other. And the Kingpin, the sheer geometry of Wilson Fisk in this movie, this massive, imposing block of absolute power, makes him one of the most physically intimidating villains ever put on screen. And then, the leap of faith, the glass breaking, the upside down shot of Miles falling upwards into the New York skyline while What's Up Danger blasts on the soundtrack. It is the single most triumphant, hair raising moment in any comic book movie. It takes the core message of Spider Man, that anyone can wear the mask, and delivers it flawlessly. It is a perfect 10.0, the undisputed king. And now we move to Pass 2, the Era-Adjusted Temporal Equalization Pass. This is where the entire board gets flipped. We evaluate these films not just on how they hold up today, but on what they meant in the era they were released. What were the limits of the technology? What was the cultural context? When we apply those filters, things change drastically. First, the holds and the drops. Far From Home, Homecoming, No Way Home, and the Amazing Spider Man films essentially stay exactly where they are. Their tech and their reception were completely appropriate for their time periods. Spider Man 3 actually drops slightly due to the era modifier. Here's what makes Spider Man 3 so fundamentally different from the 2002 film. Spider Man 2002 has problems that are deeply rooted in the limitations of its era. Spider Man 3's problems were visible, they were named, and they were criticized on release. Roger Ebert was lukewarm about it in May 2007. The critical consensus at the time wasn't, oh, this is a brilliant film that will be poorly received by history. The consensus was, this movie is an absolute mess. And it was the exact same consensus in 2007 that we have right now. But then we get to the climbers. Spider Man 2002 gets a massive era adjusted boost. In 2002, this movie basically wrote the blueprint for the modern superhero blockbuster. Achieving those kinds of visual effects and convincing an audience that a man could swing through New York City was monumental. The cultural impact of this film cannot be overstated. It was pure, unadulterated comic book sincerity. When we add the era modifier, it leaps from 6.88 to an 8.0, rocketing up the tier list. And then there's Spider Man 2 2004. This film gets a monumental boost. We can't talk about Spider Man 2 without talking about the train sequence. It is arguably the greatest action scene in superhero history, not just because the choreography is incredible, though it is, but because of the emotional climax. Peter uses his own body to stop a runaway train, passing out from the strain. And what happens? The people of New York catch him. They lay him down, they see his unmasked face, and someone says he's just a kid. In 2004, this was the pinnacle of superhero cinema. It jumps from 6.33 to an 8.33, reclaiming its throne in S tier. Across the Spider-Verse stays at 9.67, and Into the Spider-Verse stays locked at 10.0. Into the Spider-Verse literally changed Western animation forever, and that impact guarantees its perfect score will never be touched by the era modifier. Look, I know you disagree with me. I know there's the Amazing Spider-Man 2 defender out there writing a 5,000-word essay in the comments right now. And honestly, I welcome it. That's the beauty of this character. Spider-Man means something different to everyone. Drop your rankings in the comments below, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and I will see you guys in the next video. Stay safe out there.